When the lights come up, I hear the gasps about this suit coat. I get it. I had someone tell me last night, they knew me pretty well. They said, Greg, I know you own a suit, but I've heard you say before that you only wear it to marry people and to bury people. I said, well, that's usually true, but I make an exception when someone rises from the dead. How about that? So I do hope that all of you will come back next week. I'm going to start this uber practical teaching series about what makes you happy. And of course, all of us kind of chase this happiness, and most of us find it to be a little bit elusive. And I think that's because a lot of the things that actually bring happiness are counterintuitive, and the scriptures describe them beautifully. So I hope that you'll walk through the next few weeks with us as we do that. A few years ago, I was invited to be part of a group of leaders in Northwest Indiana that would connect on a monthly basis and work through some things together. It was a fantastic group of leaders who lead in education and government and industry and small business and nonprofits and media. And I just really enjoyed the time together because it kind of breaks me out of the church circle that I kind of have to live in from time to time. But when I went into this group of people, and this happens anytime I'm in public, I can almost always look at the group of people and break them into 3 subgroups. Now, my guess is when you encounter people, you could break people into the same 3 subgroups, although they might relate to you a little bit differently because you're not a pastor. So let me describe these subgroups and see if you would recognize any of them. The first group of people is what I call churchy people, and I don't use that word as a compliment. Some of you know churchy people. They're the people who in a public setting will come up to me and they'll get the sense that they're a person who loves Jesus. I'm a person who loves Jesus. Maybe we could be BFFs right off, right? And for them, everything is really simplistic, and it seems like every good thing that happens in their life, they automatically label it a blessing, and every bad thing that happens in their life, they say, well, it must have just been God's will, which I actually don't believe at all. And one of the things, I'm just trying to be honest with you, that happens when I encounter these really churchy people is I try to avoid them as much as I can. I'm not a very good pastor. I'm just acknowledging that. There's a second group of people. It's a group of people I would call church people. And it's because I get to define church. To me, the definition of church is, of course, not a building or a worship service. It's a group of people who take seriously what it looks like to follow Jesus. And they're people who live with integrity, and they live by faith, and they try to make a difference in the world, in the marketplace, wherever they live. They're humble, but they're not weak. And they're people who will be generous, and they'll fight for what's right, and they'll be there for the people who are down and out. I love it when I see people who are authentic followers of Jesus living out that faith wherever they are. It's actually what I'm trying to build here as we build a church that impacts the region around us. Those people oftentimes don't wear their faith on their sleeve. They don't talk about it. They don't vomit it out of every conversation. But you see it in them, and you see that their faith has taken root, and they have a power that they live by that's uncommon. I love it. And then there's always a group of people who are not church people. And whenever I'm in a kind of a public group, I always try to engage this group because I love the conversations that come out of it. And in this group of leaders in Northwest Indiana that I was a part of, there were 3 or 4 people who were just real straight up with me. They said, I'm not religious. I'm not a follower of Jesus. I don't believe this stuff. But we kind of clicked. And one guy and I clicked in particular. And so we'd have lunch together from time to time. And at times I'd get to talk to him about my faith. In fact, he asked me once, he said, Greg, well, if you were to narrow Christianity down to one image of it, the right image of it, what would it be? I said, well, that's a great question. Let me, in 2 or 3 minutes, try to describe it. But first, I have to be able to tell you what it's not, because there's a lot of misperceptions out there. I said, there's a lot of people who assume that Christianity is essentially a set of rules. And kind of the idea behind it is if you follow most of the rules, you're probably okay, but if you start messing up a little bit, watch out. And I told him, I said, Christianity does have rules. It has standards that God's put in place for us. But to think that the essence or the center of Christianity is its rules is a terrible, terrible mistake. It's a misunderstanding of what Christianity is all about. I said, there's other people who think that Christianity is essentially a series of sacraments and ceremonies and religious drills that you're supposed to go through, rituals that you'll follow. And I told him, I said, listen, there are healthy sacraments because they help you experience God in a meaningful way. But if you think it's about making sure you're involved in enough ceremonies and sacraments that you're good, and if you start skipping too many, you're in trouble, you've totally missed the idea of Christianity. I said there's some people who have the image of Christianity that God is essentially an angry God. In fact, he kind of sits up in heaven as a cosmic killjoy, and he watches all of you live, and he actually is kind of just waiting for you to mess up so he can zap you. I said, that's, of course, a total misunderstanding of what Christianity is. So if that's what it's not, I said, let me tell you what it is. At the core of the core of the core of the Christian faith, It's about the idea that God himself wants to have a personal relationship with you and me. And that in that relationship that you can have with God, you can actually hear from him, and he actually wants to hear from you. And he wants to give you a purpose in your life. He actually wants to be kind of a guidance system for you. He wants to take all the wrongs that we have done, and we've all done them, and give you a cleansing experience from those. And then he wants to make sure that you know that he is with you every moment of every day in a very tangible way. This is who God is, that he wants to be with us. And it's all rooted in the story of his son, Jesus Christ. And the whole story of Jesus Christ hinges on the event that we're talking about today, the resurrection, the bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ. So I would describe that to my friend, and then what I'd always do whenever I was having lunch with him, I'd take a book with me, and I would give him a book, and I'd say, hey, why don't you read this, and the next time we're together, we'll have the chance to talk about this. And I thought maybe today on Easter weekend, I would have the chance, if I could, just to give each of you a book as well. I don't know where you are in your faith. Maybe you're a skeptic, maybe you don't believe, maybe you're a churchy person, and you're offended right now, or you're a church person. But I think it's worth it to go on an authentic look at what Christianity is really about. So I want to give you a gift today, if you want it. This book is for you. It's called Who Is This Man? It's written by John Ortberg. It's a fantastic book about who Jesus really was and the impact of his followers. And all you have to do is text your email address to that number. I promise we will treat your number with respect and we will not spam you. But we'll send you a link to a free Kindle version of this book. And I would love, love, love if you'd take an authentic journey on what Christianity is at its core, that you'd get this book from us today. It'd be my gift to you. This book doesn't just describe who Jesus is, but it actually describes the impact of his followers over the 2 millennia since Jesus lived. And it's remarkable when you really study it fairly. The impact on the arts, and the impact on medicine, and the impact on culture, and the impact on science. It's remarkable because it seems as though the people who are following Jesus didn't just live out of the limitations of their own power. There was some other power that was personal inside of them, and it's changed the world. And so today, I want to actually pick up the story where I left off last week. If you were with us last week, you know I talked about the cross, and we came to the end of the story of the cross and the notion that Jesus, when he breathed his last, said, "It is finished." And then immediately after that, there's a person who's standing at the foot of the cross, and he has a chance to comment on what he's seen happen. This is how it's described. It says, "And when the centurion who stood there in front of Jesus saw how he died." Let me first describe the nature of this centurion. If you were a centurion in first century Israel, life was pretty good for you. It meant that you'd had some success. Things were going kind of up and to the right. First of all, you were a Roman citizen, and the Romans were in charge. They were occupying the nation of Israel. Second, you were a soldier, which meant you were taken care of, you were well-fed, you were in kind of the privileged part of society. But if you were a centurion, you even understand from the word, it means you weren't just a soldier, you had been put in charge of 100 other soldiers. For this centurion, life was pretty good. He had a tough assignment. It was his job to oversee crucifixions. And of course, Jesus, I'm sure, wasn't the first one that he had overseen. He had likely overseen hundreds, if not thousands, of people who would be crucified on the cross. And he saw how they went to the cross, and he saw how they died on the cross. And it was this centurion who had the chance not only to have this vast experience of crucifixions, but to walk with Jesus all the way to the cross. He oversaw them nailing him to the cross and dropping the cross in the ground. He listened when Jesus offered forgiveness to the people around him while he was hanging on the cross. And when Jesus died, this centurion said, "I've never seen anything like this before. I've seen lots of these, but surely this man was the Son of God." And for someone who had experienced kind of upward and to the right, a lot of success in life, he had to step back for a moment and say, "What is going on here?" Of course, after that, they took Jesus down from the cross, and the story goes that they buried him in actually a borrowed tomb. They secured the tomb with a stone. And, you know, if you can kind of put yourself in Jesus' followers' shoes at that stage, nobody was anticipating a resurrection. Nobody. They all were living in fear. The feelings that were going on inside of them were that of frustration or discouragement or even embarrassment, that they had said they would stake their life on this man, and now he was dead. And it seems like the men who were following Jesus were especially fearful. They went and locked themselves in a room. And while the women were fearful also, they at least wanted to do something right and go and honor his body on the first day of the week. But if you could imagine just for a moment the feelings they must have been feeling, like they were losers on this day. Here's how the story goes. Before I read this word for word, I want you to understand this is written by the Apostle John. It's in John's biography or his Gospel of Jesus. And whenever John was writing the story, of course, he's part of the story, but he never names himself as you read the Gospel of John. What he does is he calls himself the other disciple, or the disciple that Jesus loved, which sounds arrogant at first, but he's kind of saying Jesus loved everybody. It wasn't all that special, that he loved me. This is what John writes about that morning. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. Now, her first thought was not resurrection. Instead, it says, so she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one Jesus loved, and said, they have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they've put him. Someone stole the body. That's what she thinks. That's the state of mind that she was in. She was in a place of fear and embarrassment and discouragement, and she thought, I just want to honor his body. Now somebody's stolen that too. So Peter and the other disciple started for the tomb. Both were running, but the other disciple outran Peter. Isn't that hilarious to you? Like, I'm just trying to picture John, like he's writing this down a little bit later. He's like, I know this is supposed to be about Jesus, but I'm faster than Peter, so I want to make sure I just kind of slip that in there in the gospel. He outran Peter and he reached the tomb first. He bent over and he looked in at the strips of linen lying there, but he did not go in. John stopped at the door of the tomb. Then Simon Peter came along behind him and went straight into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head, the head that had had the crown of thorns on it. The cloth was still lying in its place, separate from the linen. And he's giving you some clues here, that all of a sudden this looks a little more orderly than it should if someone came and stole the body. Finally, the other disciple, who, if you'll remember, reached the tomb first, also went inside. He saw and he believed. What a powerful moment. To move from the place of discouragement and fear and embarrassment to say, no, that's not the storyline. There's a greater power that's at work here, and the power could be personal. You see, they still didn't understand from the scripture that Jesus had to rise from the dead. They're just piecing this all together themselves. This began a sequence of events where Jesus started to appear to a large number of people. He wanted to make sure that it was not doubted that he actually had risen from the dead. And so there's accounts that are told both in the scriptures and outside the scriptures of how he appeared to people, hundreds of people after he rose from the dead. It's kind of interesting, though, after he had risen from the dead, some of his disciples, it seems like they just kind of went back to the life that they had before. And if you stop and think about it, you think, well, in some ways, who could blame them? I mean, they experienced something that no one had ever experienced before, but, I mean, let's be practical about it. You got to eat, right? You got to provide for yourself. You got to provide for your family. You just got to kind of live life, don't you? And so on one of the occasions where Jesus appeared after his resurrection, this is fascinating to me. It says this, afterward, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Galilee. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, also known as Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two other disciples were together. I'm going out to fish, Simon Peter told them, and they said, we'll go with you. Now, if you know the background of Simon Peter's story, you know that when Jesus first called him to be a follower of Jesus, Jesus called him out of the fishing business. Simon Peter was a fisherman. That's what his ordinary life was. But Jesus said, no, I want to give you the chance to experience something greater. But after Jesus had risen from the dead, a guy's got to eat. And so what's he do? He goes back to fishing. And actually on this occasion, on that night, they didn't catch any fish. It was quite frustrating to them. And then Jesus appears to them on the shore, and he says, hey, I want you to try something. I want you to take those nets and throw them in the other side of the boat. And when they did, after their encounter with Jesus, the scriptures say that they gathered more fish than their nets could hardly handle. It was miraculous, actually, that the nets didn't tear. And there was something fundamentally different about what was available to them once they had encountered this very personal power of the resurrection. Now, I want you to think about this for a moment, because whether it's the centurion or whether it's the people who are first afraid and discouraged, or whether it's people who are going back to their ordinary life, this power was becoming personal to them. But I look around our world all the time and I see people who say, I'm a follower of Jesus, or people who want a power in their life, and it still seems like there's a disconnect there with that power. We shouldn't be surprised, I guess, when the Apostle Paul later would kind of take the message all over the known world. We'd go a generation later, and he would have to write back to churches that he started to remind them of this power that is actually available to anyone who believes. Now, when I was young, if you would have asked me, Greg, why do you believe that Jesus actually rose from the dead? I would have said, well, because the Bible says so. But when I got a little bit older, I realized that's a little bit of a circular argument. Why do you believe in Jesus? Because the Bible says so. Why do you believe in the Bible? Because Jesus said I should. And you have to be honest about that. So I started to study the history of this and the people who are followers of Jesus and things that have no sociological explanation over the first couple of hundred years after Jesus died and rose again. His followers, if you study this, literally turned the world upside down. They went to the whole known world. That what happened through them is unexplainable any other way except that there was a power that they had that was uncommon. And when Paul would write back to his friends in this church of Ephesus, he would send them this message that I want to send to you today. So let me just use his words. Here's what he says. I pray that the eyes of your heart may be enlightened. I want your heart to awaken this morning. I want it to be enlightened. If it's forgotten something, or it's not known something, or it's missed something, or it's not experienced something, I want the eyes of your heart to be enlightened in order that you may know his incomparably great power for us who believe. That power is the same as the mighty strength he exerted when he raised Christ from the dead. And what I see oftentimes is people who are followers of Jesus, or people who are maybe skeptical of being followers of Jesus, they don't access this power. They don't believe in this power. But the story of the scriptures is that the impact of your life and the impact of my life should be outsized because we aren't any longer working on our own power. You don't get the chance to wake up tomorrow morning and just tackle a list of things that you know you can already do. Instead, the power of God, the same power that was exerted that raised Christ from the dead, lives in those of us who believe. And I want you to have the chance to encounter that power today. Many, many people go through cycles of life. Many, many people just need an experience with resurrection power that would actually overwhelm the cycle that they're in right now. And what I see in the story of the account of the cross and the resurrection are a few different cycles that people live in. And maybe one of these is your cycle today. Would you think about this? Many, many people actually get stuck in what I call the success cycle. This is the centurion, of course. And maybe it's you. Maybe for you, life is going great right now. It keeps kind of going up and to the right. Things get better and better and better. You might even start believing your own headlines and what people are saying about you. You have the Midas touch. And I mean, at least in this season of life, things are going great, right? And if they are, I don't want you to feel bad about that. But I also want to serve as the warning because I see people who, surely they don't literally do this, but some people who start having some success, they actually look in the mirror and say, surely this man is the Son of God. We can be prone to think a little more highly of ourselves than we ought. We're prone to think a little more of our own power than we ought. But I experience people who are experiencing success all the time, and I just know in front of me that one of two things has great potential to happen. One is that the success starts to wear off. Sometimes it's dramatic, and everything gets exposed all at once. And sometimes it just feels like you've lost the touch, and you don't quite have what you used to have. And all of a sudden, the swing that when you used to set your identity on your success, you're now setting your identity on failure. And I think, should be very careful about that. What I actually see more commonly is a storyline where people's houses are getting bigger, their companies are getting larger, their vacations are getting nicer, but their soul is actually withering. And they know it. It's going on inside. In fact, in part, it's because of all the energy and effort and time and focus that they're putting in to building other things that something inside of them knows this isn't right, and I'm not centered, I'm losing some things that are very important to me. And here's my message to you. If you find yourself in the success cycle, it's okay. But don't for a moment think that you're the Son of God. Be prepared, be willing to be open to the idea that someone else is the Son of God, and there is still a power that is beyond you that can make it so your soul isn't parched, but instead is alive. Maybe your story isn't the story of a success cycle. Maybe it's the story of a discouragement cycle. I mean, this is the story of Mary and Peter and John the morning after the morning that they found the empty tomb. Maybe you're in a place in life where things feel a little fearful, a little bit like you're losing, not winning. Maybe even embarrassed if you're going to tell the story honestly, which you very rarely do. You see, I see the transformation that takes place in these discouragement cycles, and it looks a lot like the transformation that took place on that morning with Mary and Peter and John. 2 years ago on Easter, we told the story of a young man who had gone through a horrible, horrible addiction. And when he encountered the power of Christ, things changed for him. Does it make it easy every day? No, it doesn't. He texted me on February 22nd of this year to say 2 years clean, but every day it's a fight. But he has the power to fight because he has a resurrection power that lives inside of him. Last year, we told the story of a young woman here who was in just relational chaos and life had completely fallen apart until she encountered the power of God. And I love telling those stories, but it's not really about Matt's story, about Danielle's story. It's really about your story and my story. See, over the last year, my wife and I have just been really involved in the foster system in Lake County. And you see all the brokenness that's scattered among families and relationships and children who are kind of trying to dig out from underneath. Last week, our elders had the chance to pray, anoint with oil, and pray over a gentleman in our church who had just got the diagnosis, liver cancer. And whether you get a dramatic diagnosis or whether your discouragement's because of a slow burn, what I don't want you to miss today is that the power that God exerted when he raised Christ from the dead is the same power that is in you and me who believe. But if we go on living our lives as if we don't even want to access that power, we will completely miss out. There's another cycle that I see people in. It's what I call the ordinary cycle. And maybe this is what was happening with Peter and his buddies when they decided, well, we got to eat. We got to go fishing. We're just going to go back to our regular life. And I don't know about you, but I see this profile in Northwest Indiana all the time. Here's the profile. Someone grows up and they have some dreams. And they think they're going to make a difference in the world. But adulthood kind of hits them and things don't quite, strike gold off the bat. And someone kind of realizes, I'm not going to be the person to cure cancer. I'm not going to be the person to end world hunger. And they accept that they'll need to settle into a life of the ordinaries. And when I see people do this, here's what I see. I see people who mow their lawn, and they raise their kids. They live an ethical life. But the hope to actually make an impact or a difference in this world, to cling hold of a cause that could shape something, has kind of been released, and an engagement in simple survival tactics takes hold. Some of you are quite familiar with this profile because what I've just described is frighteningly close to your life. And when Jesus walked up to Peter and his friends who had decided, I'm just going to go back to normal life because you got to eat, he said, no. That's not the kind of life that I gave you to construct. The kind of life that I gave you was something that would experience so much more. And it's not okay just to settle into a life that's marked by the ordinaries. Instead, there is a power inside of you, the same power that was exerted when God raised Christ from the dead, that is in you. Don't accept a life of the ordinaries. Instead, I invite you in to orient or to reorient your life toward a cause, toward the work of God, toward something that's difference-making in this world. You see, this is the power of Easter, and it's the power of following this man. This book that I told you about just a few moments ago, some of you will want to read it because you're trying to sort out what the Christian faith is about. But a large part of this book is telling the stories of people who figured out how to live in a resurrection power and how that could take root and be difference-making for their days ahead. I hope today that you'll get this book, even if it's just for inspiration of yourself, to say life doesn't have to be the same tomorrow as it was yesterday. My friends, the power of the resurrection is real. The power of the resurrection is personal, and the power of the resurrection is accessible to you and to me if we take hold of it. Because the same power that raised Christ from the dead is there for those of us who believe. Will you pray with me right now? God, I'm asking you to pour out that power on this room. I'm asking you over the next few minutes to help us experience a transformation, a picture of what life is and what it could be, and one, God, that's rooted in the story of your Son, Jesus. God, for people who struggle to believe, I pray you help them take a step of faith. For people who are stuck in a rut, I pray you jolt them out of it. And God, I pray that this story of Easter is so personal to us that we'd never construct our lives just on our own power, but on the power that comes from you. In the name of Jesus.